Over recent years, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have already brought shame on this country and shredded our neutrality by allowing 2 million US troops through Shannon Airport to help conduct a disastrous war in Iraq that has killed so many people and displaced millions in Iraq and Syria. Today in the Dáil, the same Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have passed a motion at very short notice, without the public's knowledge, that will move Ireland's Navy, who've been doing a tremendous and brave job in the Mediterranean, saving desperate refugees from drowning in the Mediterranean, and moving them into what is effectively a European military alliance and the fortress Europe of trying to keep those refugees out, drive them back into the disaster zone that is Libya, undoubtedly leading to the deaths of many of those refugees and further destroying our military neutrality. I suppose we shouldn't be surprised that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael will do that, but it's important the public know, and it's important we fight to regain our military neutrality and keep Ireland out of military alliances and wars that devastate people around the world.
What this decision to join the Sophia military operation can only be understood in the context of a long-sustained policy to transform the European Union into a European empire with its own navy and its own army. It's not a separate issue. It's part of a long-sustained decision, one after the other. We are being drawn like quicksand with no debate, no discussion on these issues of any substance. I'm quite certain that 95%, 99% of the Irish people have no idea that this debate is even taking place and have no idea of the consequences of the decision. The whole point of it is to drag this country so deep via the quicksand that we feel that we have no alternative but to put up with it. And I think that if there was a serious debate, not just in Dáil, but a serious debate throughout the country among ordinary people, I think they would not support these policies. They do not want a European empire. They do not want a European army.
Operation Sophia. So with exactly 5 minutes, I hand over to Deputy Boyd Barrett.
Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have already brought shame on this country and shredded our tradition of military neutrality by facilitating 2 million US troops going through Shannon to conduct a disastrous war that led to 1 million deaths in Iraq, millions of people displaced, and on to the disastrous crisis we now see in Syria. And now you want to compound the shame and shredding of our neutrality by trying to implicate the Irish Navy in the filthy, xenophobic, racist policies of Fortress Europe that have led directly to 14,000 men, women, children and babies drowning in the Mediterranean in the last 2 years. Over 30,000 in the last 4 years, sullying the heroic and brave record of the Navy, who have rescued people from the consequences of Fortress Europe, 16,000 of them. You now want to sully that record by implicating them in the xenophobic and racist and murderous policies of Fortress Europe. That is what you're doing. And this is an extension of the filthy deals that the European Union has done with Turkey, is doing with Libya, is negotiating with Afghanistan, to deport, to force back, to keep out desperate people fleeing from the consequences of your friends in the US, in Britain, in France, who said when they were bombing Libya that it was about protecting civilians, but in fact was about regime change, destroying Libya, leading on to precisely the refugee disaster that we have now. And having done that, and not spoken out against it in the case of this country, you then want to take measures to collaborate with the militias and so on in Libya to force people back into this disastrous mess that the Western powers created. Just as you're doing with the desperate Syrian refugees, who would not be refugees were it not for the fact that we and others facilitated the war in Iraq in the first place, which led directly on to the destruction of Syrian society that is producing the disastrous humanitarian consequences we are now seeing. And the fact that you tried to do this at the last minute, we didn't hear about this at the Business Management Committee, something that fundamentally strikes at Irish neutrality, and then you try and push it through without any real background that moves our Navy from doing humanitarian work to doing effectively military work and work about protecting filthy Fortress Europe. And I want to just, in my last minute and a half, say also how this sort of policy also has consequences for other Irish military personnel. This cynical policy we're seeing with what happened in Camp Zuani with the Irish troops in Undoff over the last number of weeks, who came under fire, not directed at them, but nonetheless that has seriously endangered them from Syrian rebels. And I remember at the time when Simon Coveney, and I challenged him directly in here on, when was it, the 23rd of September 2014, when we should have pulled our troops out of that situation, and I said putting them in behind the Israeli side of the separation zone and Golan Heights would leave them potentially in danger from some of the militant groups in the area. This is what Simon Coveney said in response to me at the time. Commentators are talking about ISIL and Islamic State and US bombing in Syria. It has been made clear to me that the rebel forces and militia in the Golan Heights are not ISIL or Islamic State, but what is called the Al-Nusra Front, which is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. They have different objectives, and we are unlikely to see any bombing happening in that place. I mean, I pointed out at the time how extraordinary it was that Al-Qaeda had suddenly become our friends, according to Minister Coveney, but it was unlikely we'd see any bombing. And then we see, in the last few weeks, Irish troops forced on 5 different occasions to go to ground, fearing for their lives, because they are caught up in this cynical hornet's nest of Israel, of Saudi, Turkey, backing Al-Qaeda affiliates who are putting our troops in danger. And what is the Irish government doing about the cynical implication of Israel in all this, who are even publicly humiliating us, by the way, while they at the same time are cooperating with the Al-Qaeda affiliates who are putting our troops in danger? You are destroying what's left of our neutrality, and you're endangering Irish personnel in Syria and in the Mediterranean, and tarnishing our international reputation.